Hello and welcome to a cornucopia of tales and tellers. I'm Simona, and today I'm here to introduce a special episode with not one, not two, but three stories. The first story you're going to hear is an African story about a ghoul told by our friend David Heathfield. The second story will be a story I tell and it comes from India. It's about a bull that comes from the sky. And the third story is told by the wonderful Despina Ariou, who you've just heard in the last episode. Or if you haven't listened to that episode yet, well, go back and listen to it because it was wonderful to speak to her. So, without further ado, here are three stories about fantastic creatures, imaginary creatures, mythological creatures. Enjoy.
So grab a cup of tea, chai, water, or uskabreha, relax and enjoy hearing tales that have been handed down for generations, or even ones that were dreamt up yesterday.
Canyon McCann, Ficadim as a man, there was and there was not a girl, a youngest sister, the youngest of seven. And they had no mother, no father. They lived far out in the desert in a small tent. And the only one there to protect them was their little dog. Life was hard. The seven sisters had to sustain themselves out there in the dry, hot desert. But one day, the flap of the tent opened, and into the tent came an old woman with a kindly expression on her face. All alone. I will cook for you, and I will clean for you. Oh, and the sisters welcomed her in. And indeed, the old woman was very kind, and she cooked for them and she cleaned for them. But the youngest sister noticed what the others didn't, that every now and then, that old woman's kindly smile would vanish from her face, and there was a look of pure hatred at the little dog. Her eyes turned red. It was almost as if she could see a licking of fangs. Well, when the old woman had gone at the end of the day, back to the tent where she lived not far away, the youngest sister said to her older sisters, "We must not trust her. She is a ghoul." "Nonsense," said the older sister. "She cooked and she cleaned for us." But the youngest sister insisted, and the older sisters became savage in their anger, and they lifted their hands and they struck their youngest sister until she wept. And that night she couldn't sleep. But from outside, she heard a sound in the desert sand, in the depth of the silent night. Seven sisters, loved by none. I will eat them one by one. And then she heard the sound of the little dog outside. "You go up or down or any way, I will guard them night and day." And the ghoul moved away. The next day, the kindly old woman appeared there at the flap of the tent, and the sisters welcomed her in, and she cooked for them and she cleaned for them. But after a while, she said to the sisters, "That little dog of yours is eating your food while there is very little. Kill your dog. Roast your dog. Share the dog between all of you. Each take a portion and eat it." And the old woman left. And the sisters, of course, did as she said. They slaughtered the little dog. They cut it into 7 pieces, and they roasted it over the fire, and each of the sisters took her portion and ate it. All of them, that is, except for the youngest. She was so sorry. And she tried to explain to her sisters, but they were furious with her. Eat it! She went outside the tent, outside the flap, and made a hole in the sand, and buried that piece of the little dog and covered it over. When she went back inside, she tried to say again to her sisters, "It is a ghoul, I tell you. We must protect ourselves. Now who will protect us when our little dog has been eaten?" They grew so angry with her that they took their feet and they kicked their youngest sister. They kicked her until she was prostrate on the ground. That night she could not sleep. She wept, and she heard the sound of the ghoul. 7 sisters loved by none. I will eat them one by one. But then the voice. You go up or down or any way. I will guard them night and day. The voice of the little dog. And the ghoul moved away. In the morning, the kindly old woman came in through the flap of the tent. I will cook for you and I will clean for you. And she did. But she said to the sisters, one of you didn't eat your piece of the little dog, did you? There is a piece left in the sand outside. And when she had gone, the older sisters went and looked and dug and found that piece of cooked meat buried in the sand. And they turned on their little sister. You failed to do what you were told. They took that piece of the little dog far, far away across the desert, discarded it. And when they returned, they seized their youngest sister, and each of them bit her. The next morning, the kindly old woman came, and she cooked for them, and she cleaned for them. The next night, as the youngest sister lay there weeping, "7 sisters loved by none. I will eat them one by one." And the monstrous ghoul, the youngest sister, saw her open the flap of the tent. And she was as ghastly to see as you can imagine. Her eyes burned red. She was tall, bony. A tongue flicked between her sharp, fanged teeth. And there the 6 older sisters slept. The ghoul seized the oldest sister from her sleep, and the eldest sister, waking, saw the ghoul. "Now I will eat you. But where shall I begin?" And the eldest sister said, "Oh, begin with my hands. With these hands I struck our youngest sister. I should not have done that." And the ghoul ate her hands, and then she ate the rest. And the youngest sister saw how now the next sister was seized by the monstrous ghoul. "Now I will eat you. And where will I begin?" "Begin with my feet," said the second sister. "With these feet I kicked my youngest sister, and that was wrong. I should have trusted her." And the ghoul bit off her feet, crunched through those bones, and then she ate the rest. "And the next sister, where shall I begin with you?" And the third sister said, "Begin With my mouth, my teeth, with these teeth I bit my youngest sister. I should have believed her. And the ghoul bit into her face, taking her mouth, and then ate the rest. Took the next sister, and where shall I begin? Or begin with my eyes? I should have seen what my sister saw. And the ghoul plucked out her eyes and swallowed them, and then she ate the rest. And the next sister, begin with my ears. I did not listen to my youngest sister. And the ghoul bit off her ears, and then she ate the rest. And the sixth sister, begin with my stomach, because in this stomach is the piece of our loyal dog, who we should have kept, who would have protected us. And the ghoul bit into her stomach, and then she ate the rest. And the ghoul now looked, searching around the tent for the youngest sister. But the youngest sister had stealthily opened the flap of the tent and run. She ran, and she ran, and she ran as swiftly as her small legs would carry her. She ran across the desert as far as she could go, escaped the monstrous ghoul. And that girl survived. She lived in a place that she had never known. She had, when she grew up, her own daughters. And to her daughters she told the story, and her daughters told theirs, and their daughters told theirs. And that story came down through the generations, and the story was told to Aisha, who told the story to Iman, who told the story to me. So I could tell the story to you, and you're invited to pass the story on.
One day, a monk was sweeping the floor outside of the monastery when he saw on the ground the biggest tracks of hooves he'd ever seen. Whose hooves are these? What animal has got such big hooves? And he was so curious that he decided that he needed to find out. So the following morning he woke up very, very early and he hid. Then he waited and waited, and down from the sky flew the biggest bull he had ever seen in all of his life. He had seen bulls, but not as big as this one, and this was a flying bull. Well, the bull flew down and he stopped there near the pool, and then he took some sips of water from the pool. Wow, thought the monk, and he was so fascinated that when the bull started to fly up into the air, the monk just ran and grabbed the tail of the bull, and up he flew with the bull in the sky. He saw everything. He was afraid that he would fall down, but he stayed there, clenched his hand around the tail, and up and up and up he flew until the bull stopped on a cloud. It was a soft and lovely cloud. The monk hid, and when the bull flew away, the monk came out and looked around, and he saw in front of him many sweets, many different kinds of sweets. There were puddings, there were cakes, there were all kinds of them biscuits. Oh, he had never seen such a thing. And he started eating and eating, and wow, such a wonder! Every time he finished eating something, the food would appear again in his plate. And so for days and days he ate, and the food never finished. Oh, he had never eaten so well, but after a few days he started getting lonely. Oh, how lovely it would be to have his friends, the other monks, on the cloud with him. And so one day, when the bull came back on the cloud, he hid, and then he grabbed his tail just as the bull was started to flying down. And he flew down, and he came to the monastery, and there he stopped to drink at the pool. And the monk ran and ran and ran inside the monastery and told everything to his fellow monks, to his friends. They were all excited. Oh, please, please, bring us with you. And so the following morning they all hid. And as the bull flew down, they all ran, and by one, the first one grabbed the tail of the bull, the second one grabbed the ankle of the first monk, and the third one the ankle of the second monk, and so on and on. And up they flew into the air. And first monk was the monk who had already been there, and he was looking down at his friends. They were all excited. And so they started speaking. Oh, please, please tell us what kind of sweets were you eating? Oh, there were cakes, there were biscuits, there were puddings. It was lovely. And then one of them asked, oh, please, please, show us again. How big was that biscuit you told us about yesterday evening? And the first monk, he said, oh, it was this big. But to show it with his hands, he unclenched the tail of the bull, and they flew down, they dropped down, and splash, 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 splash. They dropped, they fell into the pool. And morning after morning after morning, they waited for the bull to come back, but he never returned.
Persephone was out with her friends, looking for beautiful flowers to gather for her mother, Demeter. She strayed further away from her friends because there, at the side of the bank, she saw this daffodil flower, the most beautiful she had ever seen, and as she bent down to pluck it, the earth shook under her feet, and a great chasm opened from it, and out of it came 2 black stallions carrying a black carriage, and on top of the carriage a dark figure of a driver who drove his chariot towards the stunned girl and grabbed her from the waist, made a U-turn, and immediately entered the earth again, and the earth closed behind them so that no trace could be seen of the kidnapping. Persephone's friends looked for her and cried her name, and when time passed and they looked everywhere and couldn't find her, decided to go back and tell her mother Demeter about her disappearance. Demeter was worried, sick. She asked the friends if they had seen any trace, but they hadn't. The great goddess then decided to transform her daughter's friends. She kept their human heads, but she turned their bodies into that of wild birds, vulture-like, and she had them fly high above the surface of the earth, so that they could look for Persephone from up there. The girls looked and looked, but they could find nothing, because Persephone was no longer on this earth. When their search was over, they decided it would be too shameful to return to Demeter and tell her. So they simply flew away. They flew and flew all the way from the Greek land, across the sea, across the borders, to the country where my friend Simona now lives. There, near the town of Neapolis, they found a coast, and they decided to inhabit it. And they stayed there for many a year, calling out to passing sailors with their beautiful melodic voices, chanting and calling the sailors to them, only for the poor sailors to receive a horrible death upon the rocks. And there they stayed, Persephone's friends, now the sirens, for many a year, until Odysseus passed on his way to Ithaca. But he had been warned. He had been warned by the sorceress Circe about the danger of the ex-girls, now siren monsters, and he had made his comrades, his companions, cover their ears with wax, and only he remained, a mortal man, tied upon the mast of the boat, to hear their luring singing. And as he begged his companions to release him so he could join the melodic voices, nobody paid any heed to his pleads, so the boat carried on smoothly, swiftly, rapidly, passed from the sirens, and none of them got hurt. And that was the first time the sirens had not even one mortal victim. And that was such an embarrassment, such a distraction upon their fight against all men, against the evil Hades who had kidnapped their friend, upon the men who had condemned them to this horrible fate. And now they could not even take their vengeance upon them. That was too much for the poor monsters. Out of spite, they turned themselves into rocks. And as rocks, they still remain and will be there forever until the end of life.
And thank you very much for listening to a cornucopia of tales and tellers. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another one. Until then, keep telling stories. Bye.
Cornucopia of Tales and Tellers is a passion project brought to you by English teachers Alan and Simona, who want to create a compilation, or a cornucopia, if you will, of stories from all around the world by as many tellers around the world as possible. So grab a cup of tea, chai, water, or uskabreha, relax and enjoy hearing the tales that have been handed down for generations, or even ones that were dreamt up just yesterday. Music by Purple Planet. You can find us on Facebook at a cornucopia of Tales and Tellers. And if you like what you hear, you can buy us a coffee to help fund future episodes and the hosting of our podcast. Link in the description.